put that tomorrow. All right. Good evening, or yeah, evening is when I'm recording this. Everyone. So we are continuing with some of the topics that we talked about yesterday. Hopefully, you've watched this after watching the rest of those videos. The two videos, one with just announcements, and the one yesterday that also talked a little bit about Express Get and what Express is all about. Today, I'm going to go a little more in depth into what Get is and doing some more somewhat complex operations with Get, along with, and probably in the next video, I don't think I'll include it all in one long video. We're actually going to create an app that can interact with an API using Get. I won't promise it'll be with Express, just because we might have to use some other modules that these individual APIs may force us to use, but I promise we'll get to a point where we can use some of the information that is out there on the web. But anyway, I digress. Let's jump right into it, and we can sort of talk as we go through. So last time we talked about client and server. HTTP is the protocol that is used there for responding and requesting information between the client and the server. Express is what we're using to bridge that gap between the two, and specifically the get function in our CRUD operations is the one that will just receive information, so searching for and sending back information based on what is on that server, or what is on that server, sorry. So essentially this is what we did last time. We said server.get, the slash there, which is anything between those quotes is essentially everything that comes after the port. So localhost 3000 in our example slash is what this will respond to. And then we passed in a callback function that had request and response. And then essentially we responded with hi. So this right here, this top part right here, is essentially what we did in this example right here. So we created an instance of Express, and then we essentially did that. And so just to go back and sort of show you all, let's go ahead and run this. So it printed connected to port, because that's what it did inside of the server.listen, where we're setting up the port. And if I go over here and I go to localhost 3000, the URL, I set it to, I didn't save it. If you want this to sort of react like React, where it'll if you save something, it'll auto sort of refresh. You can use in NPM. You can download a sort of resource there. I think it's called NodeMon. That will auto refresh. So if I save something here with my Express example, it'll automatically refresh localhost 3000, so that I don't have to stop the operation and then restart it again like I'm doing here. But anyway, try it again. Fresh here. There we go. So we did hi. So it's essentially all we did last time. Nothing too fancy, too flashy. Now, I didn't go super in depth in talking about what this callback function is. Just to give you a plain English definition of what a callback function is. Essentially, it is saying that if this operation here, so the server.get, and that this URL happens, then this is the function that will run immediately. Now, requests, REQ, and response, RES, are auto-generated by Express, so that you can use them for receiving some of the information and also sending some information to that given URL. So these should never change for you, because that is just the convention for Express, is using that callback function. And honestly, if you use some other frameworks, it'll be very similar as well. When we were just plain using HTTP, we saw the same thing. It's just a good way of saying this is what is attached to the HTTP request, and this is what is attached to the HTTP response, and you can use each of these. And in fact, what each of these are essentially just objects. And so if I go over here, all I did was here search for the express, what should we call it? What's the word that I'm looking for? Express response. I search for the reference, the API reference. So if you go to the API reference, which is where I was at, you can sort of see on the left here, it'll show you each of the different objects that we're going to be using. We're going to be looking at request and response right now, and I'm just going to go back to my old tab. Here it'll essentially outline, and you can see on the right, sorry, not on the right, on the left side over here, all of the different either methods or properties that are associated with the request. So these are all the things that you can use with a request and all the information that you can grab from a request. We're going to talk about a little bit of this today because some of it comes in handy. But you can sort of go through and look at some of these. So typically it'll, like for example, cookies, it'll see whatever cookies are attached to the request. You can look at the host name, IP address, the original URL, any parameters that are there, the path of their protocol, all these different things. We're not going to touch on all of them. We're only going to touch on a couple of them in this class, but they're all there for you to be able to use and see and sort of interact with. Same thing with response. It is also an object, an HTTP object that holds all of the information for responding to that request. And you can sort of go through here and see what we can do. We will typically be using where is that? We could do format. Where is it? We're at RS. Okay, send response.send, and then we can send some sort of information there. For example, here's a good example for sending a some HTTP, or sorry, not some HTML back, and being able to use that. You can send files, send status codes. We're going to do a little bit of that, all that sort of stuff. So you can sort of take a look at these and see what is relevant and necessary for your apps. We're not going to be doing something too hardcore with Express, not that we have a whole lot of time left in the semester anyway, but as I'm sort of pushing you along and hoping that you use some of this knowledge in your own time, I highly recommend you look through this and see what Express can do and why it's so widely used. And partially it's because it essentially gives you all these tools and it doesn't really care how you solve any of the problems with a server. You can just use whatever methods are relevant to you, which can always be the case for some frameworks that deal with server-side stuff, where it might force you to do certain actions in order to complete certain responses. So anyway, I digress. Let me go back. All right. So that's request and response. Again, just as a baseline, use this when you are using the get function. And also we're going to be using it a little bit with post next time. But it's just going to be your standard callback function there. All right, let's go back. Okay, so what we're going to talk about right now is essentially we are going to test out using parameters, see how we can pass information from a URL into our server, and how that sort of the requests there are processed. We're going to simulate a library of sorts where we're going to be holding some information. We're just going to essentially go through an array. We're not going to have something too fancy. And last, we're going to simulate JSONs in a local library as well. So just an array with a couple of different JavaScript objects. Again, JSON is just JavaScript object notation. So it's saying that you're creating JavaScript objects. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to APIs in the next video, but that's essentially it. So let's jump into it. Whoops, put my T down. Right, so I created a second example and I'm going to post this example. All I did to start out was copy and paste the thing from the first example just for you to be able to use. And let me go back here and let me make sure that I am canceling this previous example. Perfect. Okay. So again, our server right here is responding and getting information from this URL, which is just the slash. Now, typically, what you're going to be doing when you're using an API is you're going to be essentially accessing a specific folder that has a lot of information. So, for example, here I could have API slash, and in this case, I'm going to my motif here is going to be dealerships. So I'm going to have essentially a simulated dealership with cars inside of it, and that's where I'm going to be requesting information. So this is the URL that I'm going to be accessing from. I'm saying dealership just because I'm a big fan. I'm a big car guy, and also every time I look outside my window, there's a dealership across the street from my apartment building, and can't help but stare. So when I was planning this, that was the first thing that came to mind. But anyway, now if I want to just make sure that hi is responded and I'm going to the correct URL here, I'm just going to go back to git bash, and I'm going to do node express example2.js. It'll say connected to port 3000. I'm going to go over here and actually go to port 3000. Notice it doesn't. Come on. Oh no. Whatever, let me go. API slash dealers. Am I running into? What is happening here? I think my I think it's not liking that I did the previous file there. Let's do this. I'm going to do it at a different port number just for our own sake. Because I don't want to have to go into my task manager and kill the task for that old one. Let's go back here. I'm going to do a local host 5000. Reached slash API slash dealership ship. Okay, let me pause for a second. Let me figure out what's going on here. I think it's because I had some previous tests that are still running. Give me one. All right, we're back. I don't 100% sure to know what happened there. The one thing that I can sort of say maybe have caused that is make sure in the previous. Let me clear this up. In the previous video, I told you to use npm i-express. I just tried just instead doing install express, and hopefully, I think that installs. Yeah, that installs a more recent version that is not deprecated. I'm not sure if that was maybe the issue that was having there, but for some reason it wasn't letting me start over again. But anyway. Back to what we were talking about. So as you can see here, I'm accessing port 3000, and this is the rest of my URL. I'm going to API slash dealership. So when I go back, there we go. So back here, again, request and response are my two HTTP objects that hold some information in there. This is essentially just saying what port to listen to. So let us talk about these parameters here and these function calls here. So in my dealership, let's say that I want to specifically access for example here, if I do /API /API/dealership 1. I want to look at entry number 1. For example here, what I could do is if I want to see what that number is, I can then go over here and I can do my request dot param and see what the parameters are for my request. So one over here. So let's take a look and see what happens there. Close this. See. No, what are you doing again? Let me pause this video real quick. All right, found my issue again. This time it was when I fixed the other issue, I created a separate folder inside of there to essentially say to debug it, and then I was running that example and not the example that I was currently in. Anyway, I digress. Which is the third time I've said that today. I'm not sure why I'm stuck on that. But anyway, so back to the issue here. Let's say that in my call here, I'm trying to access, let's say, the first entry, the number 1, in my dealership. And later, let's say that I want to access number 2 or number 3, and so on and so forth. So maybe the first 1, 2, 3, each of these entries in there. Or actually, since we're doing coding stuff, let's start with 0, 1, 0, 1, 2. Is there a way that I can access this just straight up number 1 so that I know which entry in the library that I'm going to create in a moment I'm trying to grab from? Because this is a dealership of a whole bunch of different cars. How do I know which one specifically they want to access? So let's see if me doing, I'm responding essentially with the parameters of this dealership to see if that will give me the response that I'm looking for. Since hopefully this one number right here is the last parameter that it's given. And I'm going to spoil it right now, and I'm going to tell you that it's not going to do anything. So right now, it's essentially responding with an object of empty sort of curly braces there. And the reason for this is if I want to have a variable amount of entries in here. So if I want to say 0 in one case or 1 in a different case or 2 in a different case, we have a convention here with Express. Essentially what we do is we say colon and then whatever you want to call that specific parameter that may change. So for example here, I'm going to call it colon count. Now what I can do is I can do request.params and specifically grab the count parameter there. And so what this is going to do is it's going to say whatever number comes after this dealership, so it comes after the slash and is in here, whether it's 0 in one case or 1 in another case or 2 in a different case, I'm going to just respond with that number that's there. So hopefully it'll give me whatever number is in there. So let me go back over here. And I'm going to stop this one and run it again. All right, so I'm going to go back here. And I have the number 1 at the end here. I'm going to run it one more time. Did I save my code? Of course I didn't. Let's see. Run it again. Okay. There we go. Now it responds with the number 1 that I have there. And so let me try again with number 2. Gives me the 2. Oops. Number 500 gives me all of that. And so essentially, it's being able to access whatever specific information you want to put in there. Now, let's say that my API has multiple different things in it. And it's not necessarily just a dealership. I could do this, which may come in handy for you. Let's go over here. And I can do colon library colon count. And so now I can do send you are in the request dot params dot library. Oops, I can't spell. Library. Accessing this, accessing entry number that. Hope I spelled accessing correctly. Okay, so save that and let's see what that responds to me when I run this again. So I'm going to stop this and run it again. Go back here. Okay, that didn't give me a space as I should have assumed. Let's do it again. All right. Did I save my code? Nope, of course not. Okay, it's complaining about something. I'll get to that error in a moment because I think I know what it is. All right, let's go back. I believe it's because I'm trying to have two different responses here. Let me just do this. I'm going to condense them all into one. Request account and library. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, go back here. Okay, so damn it. Why can I not get the spacing correctly? Last try. I promise you it's going to work this time. Damn it. Why can't I save? There we go. Okay. Just all of that for one space. So essentially what it's doing is I'm saying you are in the dealership library. How did it get that information? It's getting it from this specific part of the URL and accessing entry number 5 because that is the last part of that URL. So you can use the colon sort of like props. It's essentially saying this is a parameter and whatever information is there you can then access a little bit later. And that will come in handy especially when you're trying to look for specific entries in specific instances. So I can change this now and let's say that instead of doing dealership I say, I don't know, what's another collection? Target. And I'm looking for toilet paper. So I'm in the Target. I'm in the Target library and accessing entry number toilet paper. So as you can see here now, using get, we can access a little bit more important information here than we've probably seen before. So I'm going to go back to my dealership example here. Come in handy a little later, and I'm going to change this to a number just for the sake of what we're going to be doing next. Okay, so let's go back to our code. So now I want to make a couple of entries here, and I want to be able to respond with some sort of information. So first example that I'm going to use, I'm just going to create a dealership in here. Equals Volvo, comma, Ford, comma, Volkswagen, and this is essentially going to simulate my API, my library here. And what I'm going to do is, instead of responding with something else, this is my dealership. This is the information that I'm holding here in my server. And let's say that they specifically want to access this library. And right now I'm just going to make it dealership so that we don't have too many variables here. Oops. Dealership. But what I'm targeting specifically is this count. So I want this count to point to a specific entry in this dealership. So how can I do that? First things first, I want to make sure that that count is not greater than whatever the length of my dealership is. So if let's do request dot params dot count is less than dealership dot length, then I know that for sure it's not going to give me an index out of bounds. So in that case, I will go ahead and send back you selected a, and then I'm going to concatenate it with dealership at request dot params dot count. So essentially I'm dynamically grabbing the information from the specific request that I'm getting from the URL, and I'm responding with the dealership entry that I have housed in my server. You can't really see me because I'm not using my camera, but I'm saying server with exclamation points, or not, damn it, I can't speak today. Quotation marks, because this is just a very, very sort of simulated version of having information that only have 3 entries. So let's try this out. So I'm going to save, stop the previous one, and this is not me telling you and trying to be I don't know, pretentious here. I'm the one that can't stick to my procedure, keeps saving stuff. All right, so I'm going to try again. So I'm going to do localhost 3000, that didn't change, API, dealership, and I'm looking at entry 0. So I selected a Volvo. Why is it a Volvo? Because it is the very first entry inside of my dealership. Simple as that. If I change this now, I do 1, selected a Ford, that's my next entry, 2, Volkswagen, whoops, 3, Volkswagen, and that's simply because I didn't change the responses there from after the third one. Now let's give it an example here of, oops, this we'll get to in the next video. Okay, let's say that it's not a valid response there. And in fact here, I also want to make sure that this is actually a number. We'll get to that in a moment. But essentially, you would want to scrub here. I'm doing this kind of because I'm going to be simulating here. But you want to scrub to make sure that this is, or check to see if count is a number. You can use isNaN or something like that. I won't get too super into that, and that's something that you've done before, so you can test that out. But what can we do in the case that it doesn't work? As you can probably tell, and you've probably seen before, let's say that I go to a site, and I'm going to do espn.com/soccer, which is a valid request. It'll take me to ESPN and their soccer page. But let's say that after soccer, I do just pure nonsense. I'm not expecting, hopefully this isn't actually a page, and we'll see what it gives me back. So ESPN is not a great example because it's not one that will redirect me to what I'm looking for. There we go. Okay, that did what I wanted. What did this give me? Lovely handy dandy thing that we've all seen before, the 404 page not found. 404 is essentially a code that is typically used when something is not found, or you just have an error for not working. And so we're going to simulate that, and we're going to do the same thing. And we are going to do here in our response, we're going to say response.status 404. And also I'm going to send a string for saying 404 not found. Let's do entry not found. So this is properly telling the server or the responding to the client with a status of 404 that you can then use. And you're also just displaying that 404 entry not found. So let's go back to our example here. And let me close this, make sure that this is saved, and go back here. And there we go. So it says 404 entry not found because I tried to access number 6, which isn't a valid entry based on my my response. And if we actually go to inspect here, let me make sure that this works properly. There we go. You can see right there, failed to load a resource. I didn't say that, but because I responded with a status of 404, Chrome interpreted that and gave us this failed to load resource. The server responded with the status of 404. And every time that I use it, it's essentially saying 404 not found. The GET request that you just did does not work. And then if I do a valid one, it goes away. So that's just sort of our easy way of doing a sort of request there. And again, this is something that you can see with just typing gibberish for any sort of website. I just use GitLab here as a great example because it will actually give me a 404. And if you looked back to what I did with ESPN, even though this is nonsense and it actually doesn't go to a page, some of these more well-formed websites will not just spit you a 404 in case. Instead, it'll just send you to whatever the last page is, or in this case, the home page, and keep you there. But that's just because they're a little more complex. Anyway, let's expand what we're doing one more time. Okay, so I have my dealership, and let's say that instead of having a dealership of just strings, I'm now going to properly have a dealership of JSONs. And what I'm going to do here is, and let me actually, I wrote this out before, so I'm just going to copy and paste this so that I don't have to spend my time here with you just typing it out. I've created a dealership, and in this dealership, and let me format this a little better, I have 3 entries. And in each of those entries, I essentially have a brand, a model, and a year. And let me make them all lowercase. It's easier. So essentially, it's an array of entries of JSONs that inside has a brand, a model, and a year. And we're going to be searching you based on that. So rather than just looking at the specific entry and essentially just using an index, we're now going to be looking specifically for something. So what I'm going to also do here is, instead of doing count, because that's not going to be something super relevant here, let's say that our first query, our first search that we're going to be looking for is based on the year. So what this is, let me go ahead and change this a little bit. And actually, I'm going to delete everything but the response, because we're going to end up having to use this response in case they put something that isn't inside of our dealership. I'm just going to put this down here. So what am I going to do? What I'm going to do, since we still have this as an array, is I am going to use here. I'm going to use the not JSON. This is what I was using to find the acronym. The find method for an array. We haven't specifically covered the find method, but you can sort of look at. I'm using W3 Schools because they're probably the most concise way of searching for something. But find essentially will allow you to pass in a function inside. That's the only parameter that that it needs. So the array, and then a function for if it finds it and that function returns true, then it's going to return that current value that it's in where it returned true. So let's go ahead and write that out. So I'm just going to write I'm just going to go ahead and do, I'm going to create a variable, and I'm going to say let, what word should I use? Let result equal dealership dot find, and in here I'm going to do a function, and I'm going to say function value, and in here I need to make sure that for each of these dealerships, so it's going to go one by one here, I'm returning a case where it'll be true. So whatever I'm searching for will be true. So for example here, I'm going to return, and I'm going to say if val, which is going to be each of the entries in the dealership, which is a JSON, val dot year equals, let's do, hopefully it'll let me do this. I'm going to do request dot params dot year. So again, find, all it does is it allows you to pass in a function that if the function evaluates to being true, then it'll return that and return that specific result that it ended up being true, or that specific entry where it was true, inside of result. So essentially it's going to go through this, just to reiterate again, it'll go through here and try and find, let's say that I have 2018 in there, it'll go through here, it'll access year, see that it's 2020, this function inside of it will return false because it wasn't equals, so it'll move on to the next one. And then this entry over here, which is the next in the array, it's 2017, it's not 2018, it's not going to go, and then it's going to go here and it's going to say brand, the year is 2018, so this return statement is going to evaluate to being true, so find is then going to return into result this specific entry, which is going to be this complete JSON. So now what I can do is I can say result dot send result, or sorry, respond dot send response dot send result, and I'm going to comment out this 404 real quick. And let's go ahead and test this out. Let's save this, stop my previous, run it again. Okay, didn't do anything. That's the point. So I want to search for 2018. What happened here? No errors. What did I do wrong? Send result. I have a feeling that my function is not correct here. Val.year, that is what I called it, equals request.params.year. Let me try this out and see if this will help. This was what I was saving for later. If it doesn't actually find the result here, so if there's some sort of problem with my function here, I can do this. I can say if there's no result, and this relies on the truthy and falsy value. So if the variable actually has a value associated with it, then it'll be a true if I insert it inside an if statement, versus if I do result, not result. That means essentially if there's nothing assigned to result, it'll then go inside this if statement. So result If not results, then I'm going to do this. My response with my status here. Go. Otherwise, oops, else, send back the result. All right, let's see what happens. And I anticipate it's because it's not finding the correct. Oops. Let's run it again. Okay, entry not found. That means there's something wrong with my logic here. All right, instead of having you sit through me parsing through it, let me pause the video and I'll come. Wow, this was next in my notes and I ignored it. Let me go back here. It wasn't that, it was in the arrow function. This is why. So essentially what is happening here is I am comparing something that is a number. And this right here, request.params.year, whatever your parameters are, it's going to be a string. So it's not going to be directly a number. So what you can do here now is, instead, I can do parse int here, or I can convert each of these to a string. Either one works just fine. And let's try this out. So I'm going to comment this out. Again, let's go back here. There we go. Okay, so again, this will return a string. It doesn't automatically know if it's a number or not, which I talked about earlier before. But anyway, so as you can see, it responded with the JSON that had the matching year. And so I can format this a little bit better if I want to, like I did previously, by just going in and saying you are looking for this for it and that sort of stuff. And so this is me sort of simulating, like if you go to a website and I do, I don't know, go to cars.com and I can sort of do, I want a mini, I don't know, Cooper that's under $2,000 for some reason. Let's not do $2,000, do $8,000. Each of these search queries, that will essentially add up, and you can sort of see it at the top here a little bit. It forms it a little bit different because this is kind of a complex website, but you can see that all of the different parts that it's going to be requesting information from their servers is up here, because it's going to end up using some of that information. And so then you can see some of these responses, and it'll generate these responses based on the search parameters that you have there. This is a very basic version of that, but that's essentially what it's doing. Now, here's my task for you before we close off this video. I want you to extend this a little further. So instead of just doing 2018, I want to be able to say a 2018 Ford Focus, yeah, let's just do Ford Focus. And actually, let me go back over here just to make it a little bit easier on you. And let me take away the spaces, and let me do Veloster N with an underscore, Golf R with an underscore, and RS with an underscore. That way, when you're searching through it, you don't have to use a space because that will not come in. That will not work. All right, so I want to be able to say the year, search for the year, then search for the brand, then search for the actual model type. And so go ahead and take a moment, use what we just talked about, pause this video, and make sure that you are searching specifically and make sure that all three match up. Otherwise, it should give me a 404 and say, this car was not found. All right, assuming that you've already done it, let's go ahead and go over the answer. It's essentially just modifying some of the if statements here. So now what I can say is return, in this case, and I can just surround this in a thing right here. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to do year. Another parameter is going to be brand, whatever you want to call it, and model. So now we have three different parameters, and this is allowed again because it'll just take a look at anything that has the colon in front of it as part of a parameter. And so now what I'm going to do inside of here, so this is my dealership.find. Instead of just looking at year, I'm going to do year and if I'm going to just copy and paste this so that it makes it easier. And okay, there. So instead of doing year, I'm going to do val.brand. And now I don't have to parse it because it's going to be comparing a string to a string. So I can do year, brand, and take away this, and instead of doing year, I'm going to do model and model. And just to reiterate here, these names for the parameters and the actual parts, the properties of the JSON, so the JavaScript object, they don't have to have the same name. So I could have one as brand and one as something else. Just here, for clarity's sake, I called them the same thing. So now let's test it out and let's see that it works. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to refresh. And actually, let me format this a little better. So instead of just responding with result, I'm going to say you have one result. Let's just do results. And I'm going to respond with the result dot year plus a space plus results dot brand plus space plus result dot model. All right, and that's just me formatting it a little bit better. Stop this here. Start it again. All right. Notice it says cannot get. That's because I didn't finish and it doesn't have the rest of the parameters, so it's not going to work. So I'm going to do Ford focus underscore RS. Again, I changed it to be underscore because that makes it easier on you instead of having to deal with spaces. And there we go. Results are, it is a 2018 Ford Focus RS. I found one result. If I change it even to be Ford Focus, entry not found because it didn't find a Focus. If I do 2017 Volkswagen Golf underscore R, that worked. Give me Golf R. Let's say I do Golf, doesn't find it because it's looking for Golf R, and so on and so forth. So this is just a simple way of me querying using the URL based on whatever use, whatever information, whatever library, whatever data we have on our side. And so I'm simulating me being the server with this being my information and the person who is requesting based on the URL. So localhost 3000 and then this is the URL. They're able to get the information that is necessary there. And so that's how I do that. Now, I talked about last time how get can be used two different ways. One is looking for a specific model like this one, and one is for just having all of that information be spit back at you. And so we can do that. What we can do is we can have two different server.gets, and in here, well, I just did something dumb. What did I do? Why is there so much space here? Okay, I'm going to write a second server.get. and I am, instead of doing a specific year, a specific brand, and a specific model, what if they want to get the whole dealership? Now I'm going to do something a little different. I'm not going to necessarily do all of this. I'm just going to respond with each of these here. And so I can do this, and I'm just going to format it a little bit nicer, and let's say let dealership string equal. All right, I'm just going to write a quick loop, and I'm going to say let I equals 0, I is less than dealership dot length I plus plus, and I'm going to compile all of that, this lovely stuff in there. So I'm just going to copy and paste that, and I'm going to say dealership string plus or equals dealership string plus the result dot year. Or now let's not do result because we're not using a result. We're doing dealership at I dot year dealership dot I dot brand and dealership dot I dot model. Perfect. And then I'm also going to do a semicolon at the end there. So this way it's compiling it all together. Now this won't give me a nice answer. I think I can do I believe this, I can't remember if that's the exact way to do an escape sequence for a new line in JavaScript, but let's try this out. So essentially what I'm doing here is I'm saying, what if they specifically just ask for dealership as a whole? And so what I'm trying to do is I'm going through the whole dealership, which is just an array of JavaScript objects, and I'm just going through and I'm compiling all that into one string. And then what I can do now is respond .send, and then I'm just going to do the dealership string. Let's see what it gives me. Okay, so that doesn't work. It's not golf R. That still works. And now let's say that I want to just do dealership. And it gives me that. I didn't use the correct escape sequence for, let's look up what that is. String is new line character JavaScript. That's what I did. Try not do it the correct way. Okay, I don't feel like investing a whole lot of time to figure out why it's on a different separate line, but you can sort of see what the gist of it is here. So now it's printing out all of the different entries because they set dealership. So now I'm fulfilling both parts of what get is supposed to do as me being the server, with me being the server. So looking for a specific request or a specific entry, and also just blurting back all of the different responses there. So that is about it, I believe. So please make sure you know how to do this. This is essentially what our next exercise is going to be. It's going to be partially this and partially some of the stuff that we'll talk about in the next video that I may post tomorrow as attached to the exercise. But essentially, we are just going to be using server.get and making sure that we are able to respond with the correct, based on the correct URL that is being asked for. So, hope this helped. Let me know if you have questions. Please respond on Piazza. I'm also going to upload this to YouTube. And let me know if there's anything else that I can do. And please come to office hours. It gets lonely in there. So that I'm more than happy to explain this again. All right. Take care, everyone.